Hey everybody, we're back again and we're just kind of being dorks and playing with our background. So Jen chose to be at the beach, so I guess I'm going to be on the moon. So fuck it. Today we're going to talk about pop psychology, statements, terms, quotes, things like that, and debunk some of the things that are so commonly thrown out there. Um, and we wanted to start with um, cramming the night before an exam and is an effective way to retain information. What are your thoughts about that, Jen?
I'm a big believer in, state dependent learning, and you learn and remember, like you recall in the state that you were in
Yeah.
when you like studying. So if you are a stressed out mess and you're up till 4 a.m., 5 a.m. and you go into your test, it's not a very good way to remember things. You're tired, first of all. That state dependent learning is, when we're stressed out, when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, our left side of our brain goes offline, and that's where we find our reason and our logic and our recall. So cramming the night before is probably not the best study habits to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, there's a cool study that they found that usually the best way that you test is to test the same way that you learned. And it
Yes.
was actually, I think the study actually tested people that were drinking, and if they drank while they studied, they also did better if they were drinking when they tested. So
Yes.
it but that doesn't don't hear that to say, hey, you should drink for all your tests. It doesn't mean you're going to test better because you're drunk, but you're more likely to retain the information if you create the same environment. So when I'm working with people that have test anxiety, for instance, I will ask them, what is one of your most appealing places, a place in your mind that you've been to or that you've created that just really brings you peace and calm. And I remember a kid I was working with who loved to kayak. And one of the ways we addressed his test anxiety was to talk in our sessions about kayaking and how that helped his body feel really calm and relaxed, so that when he would test, he would do the same thing. When he felt any anxiety, he would just mentally go kayaking, but it's not just the thought of it, it's the feeling in his body of being in that place that down regulates his body so that he has access to that prefrontal cortex that's creative and effective problem solving, and he's a good learner that way. And so that's what I always recommend to people that have test anxiety is have that place that you can mentally go to that helps your body shut off and just be present, and they
That
tend
you
to do better on tests.
that drinking, the state dependent learning when you're drinking. I always remember back when I was in college, one of my favorite drinking games was President and Asshole. And when we would get really drunk and then play it. Don't drink to the excessive. Know your limits, people out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Moderation is the key. Um, but when I was sober, we'd start to play the game and I could not remember the rules for the life of me. And then I'd start drinking. I'm like, I remember. So it's like that state dependent learning,
That's
what's the
funny.
state you learn it in,
Yeah.
it's better to be called like when you are in that same state. So, going out and staying up all night long, your body feels like it's at a rave. And then
Yeah.
you go into a test and it's super quiet and super chill. And you're just like, okay, okay. And so that recall, our brain's not going to allow us to recall it in that calm state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that kayaking, that's what I do with my clients when they're like, trying to learn a new skill with, when they come in, I always tell people I could teach you all the skills in the world, all the coping skills, but while you're in fight, flight, or freeze, you're never going to remember when to use
Yeah.
them, how to use them, or what I taught you. You
Yeah.
can't way out a paper bag.
Yeah.
So
You're not creative when you're surviving. You're just surviving.
yes, and our
Yeah.
recall and our memory, it's not work that way. We're going into survival, and our brain is designed to survive, not
Yeah.
thrive. So if you are stressing yourself out, staying up 2, 3 nights in a row, you're not
Yep.
going to do well on that exam.
Absolutely. And sleep is critical for establishing consistent, strong memories.
Right. Well,
So
not just sleep,
accurate.
the rapid eye movement and sleep, right? We
Yeah.
go into that
Yeah.
briefly throughout the night, but that REM sleep is so important for our mental health, for our physical health, for being able to recall things that we, have deep down there. But if you're
Yeah.
not getting that REM sleep and you're not getting enough sleep, you're going to have a hard time.
Yeah. Well, and if just to understand how the brain works, the majority of our information that we do on a daily basis is really stored like short-term memory in our hippocampus. And when we go to sleep and we go through our, 4 to 6 REM cycles, every one of those, the longer you sleep, the deeper that sleep is, the more effective it is for actually cleaning out your hippocampus and moving that short-term memory into long-term memory. So if you're missing those cycles, you're not cleaning out that hippocampus so that you're establishing those memories, but there's more left in there and less that you can retain the next day as well because you haven't gotten that sleep. So that sleep is actually good for putting that information where it needs to go in your brain so that you can access it as long-term memory. So,
Well, and that REM sleep is super important in processing traumatic events too. But what's
yes,
the thing that is actually like, interfered with when we go through something traumatic? Usually our sleep.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, one of the ones that stands out for me, we have a list of 100 here that we're picking from. Um, and so, one of them that I think is interesting that people really believe is that people are either left-brained or right-brained. And that's absolutely not true. We have, you know, creative individuals and very, logical alpha individuals. There's lots of different ways that you can describe different individuals, but everybody accesses both parts of their brain. And it's just a term that we use. It doesn't have a lot of accuracy to it.
Right. I always say like the people who are, the engineers, right? We call them, very logical and reasonable, right? And then they're
Yeah.
creative people. We're like, you're all emotional, but
Yeah.
we all have the capability of using both sides of our brain. It's just
Yep.
being able to slow down and tap into it.
Yeah, and we all have our tendencies to fall into different lenses when we work. There are people that just really need to be creative and produce, and other people just need that logical information and but they both still use both parts of their brain and they have
And also,
access to that.
you have to look at nature versus nurture, right? A lot of times when we use only our left or our right side, it's because, in that environment that we grew up in, we had to learn to cope. And
Yeah,
oftentimes being non-emotional and being all logical, was a coping skill to get through childhood.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then
Yeah.
that leads to another one that people only use 10% of their brain. It's a ridiculous statement because there's no way to measure that,
Right.
right? We know that there's a measurable increased use and energy in our brain when we do certain things like, we're really conscious of an experience or very aware. I use the example of, think about when you learn to drive, how intentional you had to be when you're taking your driving test and, you know, look left and look right and remember that turn signal and that pedal and so there's a lot that has to consciously go in that to pass into that experience so that you can pass your test. But now we drive from one town to another and never think about the pedals or the turn signals and we just do it automatically because when we're very conscious and intentional, we are using a measurable increase in energy, but you can't say you're only using 10% of your brain all the time. We
Right.
do use less energy when we mindlessly do things. And as human beings, I think the best way to look at it is that human beings are designed to ensure their survival. So we tend to conserve energy. So we need
Yeah.
to do things very mindlessly. But when we do things intentionally, that's also how we learn, really really focusing our attention on a task or a skill and you experience it And then it becomes that emotional response, right? It just automatically happens. You don't have to think about it,
Right.
which is also why it's important when you have trauma that you address it to some degree. If you don't fire a network, you don't change a network. It has to be fired. So, but it doesn't need to be, 12 sessions in tears talking about the same issue. But it has to be fired, and then you interact with it in a different way. And your brain goes, okay, that feels better. So
Right.
it rewires your brain, and um, you know, your body responds mindlessly after that, but there's no way to measure
But our
10%.
body responds mindlessly because it is rote memorization, right? And
Right.
we're using all that brain for to that memorization to come through.
Sure.
And if you think about like dolphins, right? Dolphins are able to have the ability to shut off parts of their brain, right? So when they're sleeping, they swim side by side. One has their left side of their brain turned off, the other has their right side of their brain
Yep.
turned. So they swim in harmony, looking out for danger. If we turned off our hemisphere, it's not possible. We wouldn't survive.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And if we turn off the right side of our brain, we don't have access to the left side of our bodies. So,
exactly.
yeah,
Right.
we're just falling over everywhere.
Not a stroke.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
dolphins have an amazing ability to turn that off. I mean, that's part of their
mhm.
evolutionary survival skills. We don't have that. We've
Yeah.
had been told, and from an evolutionary perspective, that we have to keep our brain on. It just doesn't
Yeah.
turn, and we just can't use 10%. We have to use
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
think
And
about,
when
yeah,
we
when we,
sleep, we're actually using, they say, more energy when we sleep because they're, we're going through the process of moving long-term memory or short-term memory into long-term memory, and using all that, firing all those different networks as that's happening. So yeah, even when we're sleeping, we're using our brain.
but you think about our brain, right? Like this is our biggest contender in life, right? You think about any, a lot of our times a lot of our abilities are hindered because of our emotional shit gets in the way of
Yeah.
our ability to follow through, our ability to like get motivated. So a lot of times, it feels like we're only using 10% because all that emotional stuff that we've been through feels like it's clouding our brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that leads, I think that's a good segue into the next one, which is IQ is the only measure of intelligence. So
Oh.
not true.
Oh.
Yeah.
What do they
Yeah.
say? There's 8 different kinds of intelligences. I can't remember what they say, but there's like musical, there's books, there's like
Emotional.
emotional intelligence. Yeah, there's several
Yeah.
different intelligences. And although one person could be book smart, I mean, you've met people in your life that have
Yeah.
no emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and
Yeah.
I think, and this could just be my own bias because the field I am in, or, just the way I see the world. But I think emotional intelligence has way more value in the world because as human beings, we ensure our survival by connecting with others. We're more at risk when we're in isolation of
Right.
others. So having that emotional intelligence helps us regulate how we respond to our environments, our internal and external environments, but it also how we regulate that has an impact on how other people regulate their environment because we're a part of their environment. So emotional intelligence is crucial for healthy relationships.
Yes.
So I think that's, and they call that EQ, emotional intelligence, instead of IQ. So,
Right. Well,
and
that EQ, right? Like coming up from evolution, we are not lone wolves. We don't do well as lone wolves because we need that community to help us, hunt, gather,
yeah,
take care of the kids,
yeah.
perpetuate our species.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. If
know?
you have a deer in a herd and it gets removed from its herd, it actually produces more stress. Its body has to be more hypervigilant to an attack, where when it's with its herd, there's other deer that are notifying it of risk. Their senses are picking up smells or sounds that notify the herd of a risk. In isolation, our bodies tend to do the same thing because human beings are herd animals.
Yes.
So We need that emotional intelligence to be able to work within a social environment because yes, you do have an impact when you work with other people. And I think that's part of, people talk about introverts and extroverts, and I know that's in here in our list somewhere too. But, people tend to think that introverts just hate people, and that's not necessarily true. Extroverts don't like people more. Everybody's different, but it's really how you balance your own value in the same space that you value others'
Right.
presence. And, relationships, for instance, you have to really integrate realities. And if you don't have that tolerance, right, that's an emotional intelligence component to have tolerance for somebody else in your space, right?
Right.
Or have tolerance for somebody else's thinking. If you don't have that tolerance, then it comes across as I am the most important person in the room. And the other person is going to be like, no, you're not. And then we're going to butt heads. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
One of the things I think about is this movie, I know it's a movie, a kid's movie, but The Croods. I think about that in
oh,
general.
yeah.
How in the Croods, the dad was so set in his ways. He had no emotional intelligence. The world and the people around him were telling him, we have to move, we have to go. And this guy was so set in his ways that he did not want to leave. Now, think about that. If we're going through life and we see all the signs around us, but we are so stubborn and we have zero emotional intelligence, we are not going to be able to perpetuate the species.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
because nobody's going to want to be around us.
Right. Get left behind. Everybody else is gone. You get left behind. You're
Yep.
stuck in that world ending thing, and you're not, survival of the fittest or,
Yeah.
Darwin's theory of evolution.
Yep.
You will
Absolutely.
not make it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
it really,
that
go ahead.
it is. It's just a balance between any two individuals, how you make an environment when you're in the same space together work. If there's no integration in each other's realities, then yeah, you just end up having this conflict and it feels like stress because your body's like, I'm isolated, I'm alone, because I can't stand this person. But it's not necessarily just that person, it's also our tolerance threshold for dealing with people.
Well, and you think about men and women, right? How we're so different emotionally, how our brains operate. And from an evolutionary perspective, men went out and hunted and gathered, right? So they were out for months at a time by themselves,
Yeah,
trying to hunt the great big mastodon, right? The
yeah,
women stayed behind to raise the village. They
yep,
had to learn to be emotionally intelligent. They had to learn to be flexible. They had to learn to sit there and be able to learn how to compromise.
yeah,
So sometimes you find a lot of women being the ones that are compromising, giving in, saying, okay, and the men being like, no, I don't want to. I'm the crudes.
yeah,
It really comes down to basic biology. Our brains have evolved very differently for
yeah.
very different purposes.
And there's the component of socialization too. This is actually one of the common topics that I address with couples. If I'm working with a man and a woman, they've been socialized very differently. Men are
Yeah.
often socialized as providers, protectors, problem solvers. Women are typically socialized as relationship keepers.
Yep.
So, and Gottman's research shows that I think it was 85% of the problems that are brought up in a relationship are generally brought up by women. But socially, men in society, it has been perpetuated often by men that women are nags. But when you maintain that perpetuation, women end up feeling like he doesn't listen to me, he doesn't care, when really the reason she does bring up problems is because she's been socialized that way. But the purpose of bringing up problems is to improve those problems because that's how she's been socialized. That's why her biology is the way it is. We
Yes.
nurture and we care,
Yes.
and it's healthy for men to start to listen to the complaint and they find some integration in those realities. That doesn't mean every problem that a woman brings up in the relationship is okay, we have to do it her way. She's smarter than me about relationships. she also has to be able to accept influence from him, because sometimes it's good for us to take our men's perspective and do things more logically. Not that women are more emotional, but they tend to address things more from an emotional standpoint in a relationship. Men may be like, no, that doesn't matter. If a woman has 10 friends and she needs to buy 10 gifts, and the man is like, why do you have to do that? We don't buy gifts for our friends. A woman's like, well, this is how you maintain relationships. And it may be, but yeah, sometimes we have to accept our men's influence
Yes.
about, that does cost a lot of money. And then I have to work all the time because I am a provider, and, I have to work more to pay for that. And then you gripe at me because I'm not home maintaining a relationship with you, because he is socialized to be a provider as well. So couples will get into this back and forth, but it's not what either one of them is doing against the other person. It's what they're doing for themselves. It's their normal within the context of their own lives, but normal isn't always effective. So yes, you have to get to that integration where the world works for two people in your environment, not just one.
Did you read the article? It was in Psychology Today, and I forgot who wrote it. So I'm sorry out there if I forgot your name, but it was the walkaway wife syndrome. And it was talking about they were doing research on relationships and why all of a sudden, women just up and left and why these men make great second husbands. And they found that in the relationships that the woman would tell the husband something is wrong. But the woman was still having sex, still cooking, still being an amazing wife. So the husband was like, well, nothing's wrong. She's still doing all the things. So it can't be that bad. So there
Mm-hmm.
was no attempt at changing. And then they found that there was a certain point where the woman left emotionally. She got to the
Yeah.
point where everything was changing. She pulled away emotionally. And when women pull away emotionally, we're
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
There's no going back.
Yeah.
They found that when she pulled away emotionally, the men were like, oh shit, I better do something to get my wife back. So they started doing all the things that the wife had asked 2, 3 years prior.
Yeah.
But that the wife was already done.
Yeah. She
So
was already checked out.
yeah, and then not much longer, the divorce would happen. But they
Yeah.
found that men made really great second husbands or third husbands because they learned a little bit too late what needed to be done. So they did all the work at the
Yeah.
end of the relationship, but it was too late for the woman. So
Yeah.
oftentimes they'll go in and like the woman will be surprised, like, why was he doing this differently than with me? And it's
Yeah.
because we told them exactly what needed to be done and they didn't do it on time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that goes both ways. There's men, I've seen that in lesbian
Yes.
relationships, male gay relationships. It's everybody has a limit for how much they can take. If somebody doesn't accept influence from me, then eventually I'm going to be, okay, it's never going to change and I'm going to check out. I remember I saw recently, it was a video, it was a reel or a TikTok or something, and it showed this man just pissed off and pointing and screaming like he was the wife. And then when the fight stopped, when he just sat there and ignored anything that was happening, it was, I wish I had saved it, but it was basically saying, if she's doing this, she's still invested in the relationship. And then the next step when she was quiet is, this is when she's done.
Yes.
So, and I say that a lot of times when I work with couples, the couples that are fighting tend to be better off in my experience, because they're at least still talking about a problem.
Right.
But the
Maybe
couples
the
that,
same problem from the past like 20 years.
sure,
They're still
yeah,
talking about it. There's still hope.
yeah,
Yeah.
couples that don't talk tend to be worse off because they're not even addressing a problem. They're just checking out of the relationship, stonewalling, as Gottman calls it.
Yeah.
So taking a break from a big conflict is not stonewalling. It's not coming back to address it and get to some better, let's try something, when
Some kind
I
of resolution, right?
yeah, when I work with my clients, we don't problem solve. We're making movement towards a problem, right? Where, you say, okay, here's how you see it, here's how I see it. What are we going to try next? Let's do this. if that fails, it doesn't mean they actually failed. It means they learned a little bit, but they have to come back and then, figure out what they're still missing about
Yeah.
that issue. And then they make another step. And a problem is only solved when you look back and you say, okay, we don't have that problem anymore. That's when a problem is solved.
Exactly. And problems get solved by the process of elimination, right? We try
Yes.
things, work, we move on to the next thing,
Yeah.
and these things were not taught to us growing up. So we're learning as we go. And,
Yep.
people come from very different backgrounds and very different experiences. So
Yeah.
what they saw, they think is normal growing up, right? And you come together and you bring in the things that don't work.
Yeah.
So it's being able to have that conversation of what didn't work? What do we want to work? And if we don't know how to make it work, let's learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really about listening to each other to understand a problem.
Yeah.
A lot of times couples go into a conflict and they're just talking the whole time trying to get themselves heard, but they're also not listening to their partner who's talking at the same time and also
Yeah.
trying to be heard. It is a matter, and it's a skill. It's not something that we're born with. We're not being taught this in school, which I think would be awesome.
Right.
But
Learn
it
how to
is
talk
a
about
skill.
religion, politics, and conflict.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So yeah, it is a skill that I
Yeah.
help couples learn so that you can listen to understand. If you both have an engine that you want to run and he's got half the bolts and she's got half the bolts, or she and she's got half the bolts, or he and he, it doesn't matter. Um, when your partner has half of the bolts, you can't just be plugging your bolts in where they go. You have to really understand, where do these bolts need to go in this engine? And we got to work together to make this engine run.
I
So,
used this activity where I would give my couples each half the directions of something, right? And
yeah,
no matter what, they were going to fail if they didn't work together. They
yeah,
had to work together and talk and listen and not be like, well, you're doing it wrong. Because most of the time we listen to defend ourselves.
yeah,
This was an automatic assignment that would fail if you did not work together and share. That was the
yeah,
most important thing is why are you not sharing what you have with the other person?
yeah. I would do the same thing with a puzzle. You take the box away so they don't get to see the picture, and they both have half of the pieces. The only way
Right.
you're going to get that puzzle figured out is by communicating with each other and working together to get your pieces to fit.
Yeah. But what do we do most of the time? This is mine.
Yep.
I can share with you. We're
Yeah.
so vulnerable. We don't want to be vulnerable. We
Yeah.
try to hide that, because of our attachment issues.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's mine. I'm not going to share anything with you.
Yeah.
And automatically, you're going to fail. Your
Yeah.
relationship's
You
going to
don't get
fail.
trust in a relationship without vulnerability. I like
Exactly.
to compare it to making a financial investment. If you're investing in something financially, when do you get a return on the investment? Only after you take the risk, the vulnerability. And
Exactly.
then when you get that return, you start to trust that investment. A relationship is exactly the same. If you're
Yes.
never vulnerable, you never give your partner the opportunity to not exploit that vulnerability. And also, if you're not vulnerable, you're also not trusting, giving your partner the opportunity to learn about you. So
Yes.
they start forming their own impression of you and they're like, this is why you do it. No, that's usually not why they do it, but that's what you've been left with if you don't communicate. And that's
Exactly.
emotional intelligence,
Yes.
understanding how to listen to understand. And, I listen and silent have the same letters, right?
Yes.
So you listen by being quiet while they're talking or asking questions through curiosity, not why don't you just do it my way, but why is that important to you? What are some ways that I've contributed to that problem? That's not admitting guilt or intent. That's just, how do you see it?
Exactly.
And that's a vulnerable thing to say. What are some ways I've contributed to that problem? It it feels vulnerable when you start doing it, but the more you do it and know that you're not admitting intent, the more that person sees, my partner is trying to listen to understand how I see things without defending.
And what's that quote? Nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. So that emotional
Oh yeah.
intelligence is super important
Yeah.
to be able to build relationships because again, you could have all the answers in the world, but if you're a dick, an asshole, bitch, whatever, right?
Yep.
No one's going to listen to you. No one's going
Yep.
to trust you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
so let's see, what's another one on here? Playing classical music makes babies smarter. It was actually called the Mozart effect. And I remember back in the 80s or 90s, they sold all kinds of Mozart baby
oh yeah, the
toys
DVDs, the
and
baby Mozart
recordings.
DVDs
Yeah,
too. Yes.
yeah. And it's all garbage.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And
it's giving your kids just stimulation, right? I mean, have you
yeah.
seen that video of that guy that plays guitar and he puts his baby, his newborn baby
Oh
on?
yeah. So cute.
Yeah, and it's like, you give them stimulation, right? You stimulate their brain. Like you said, we
Hmm.
have the most neural pathways, before the age of 7, right? We had the most
Yeah.
neural happenings in our brain. So you give kids stimulation, you teach them foreign languages, right? You talk to them in different, that was one of them too, talking to them in a foreign language.
Yeah.
It's easier to learn things at that age because there's the most neural pathways we'll ever have in our life.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
not
And
just classical music, but it's just being able to give your baby stimulation, eye contact, attention,
yeah.
building that attachment with them is the most important thing we can do.
Yeah. And, imagine a metalhead. You take a metalhead and you're like, hey, come listen to Mozart. They don't all love it. And
Right?
kids are the same way. They don't all love the same things. I remember with my grandkids, my granddaughter, when she was little, I would sing, You Are My Sunshine, My Only Sunshine. And she absolutely loved it. Well, when my grandson was born, I would sing it and he'd be like, oh, stop. He never wanted me to sing it. So,
If you like David Foster and Catherine McPhee, he is like
oh, yeah.
music producer and she was on American Idol, so she's an actress and she's a singer. I
Right.
don't know if you've seen the videos of their son who was 2, like playing the drums.
Yeah.
Like that kid was rocking out, but it's like what we expose our kids to, depending on their temperament,
Yep.
is
Yeah.
what's going to help them like have things being imprinted on them.
Yeah, we're all normal within the context of our own life. It doesn't mean normal is always effective.
Yes.
So, you know, yeah, not everybody wants to listen to Mozart. I've worked with families where, the parents are like, you need to get out there and you need to work out. You're depressed because you're not working out. And it was because that's how the parents would do things. But the kid is like, no, when I get home from work, I want to play video games. And the parents are like, no, that's bad for you. It wasn't bad for him. It was actually good for him. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons he was depressed was the amount of grief that his parents would give him about not doing things their way. And when they started to back off and let him manage things himself, he started to really thrive
Right.
designing his own life.
Yes. It's when we're trying to put our own wants and needs and live vicariously through our children where we
Yeah.
find a lot of mental health problems.
Yeah. And it's all well-intended advice, but your advice doesn't work for everybody, which is why
Exactly.
I think we have to address things like this pop psychology stuff because
Yes.
these may be things that work for people. It doesn't mean they're statistically sound in terms of, psychological accuracy, but yeah, they can work for each individual person.
Yep.
Yeah.
My son, he had a milk protein allergy when he was born, and we didn't know that for the first 9 months. And that kid would just vomit and like cry, vomit and cry 20 hours out of the day. Now, the only thing that would settle him down was this heartbeat CD that I would put in my minivan. So it's funny, I'd pull up places and it sounds like the bass was like crazy outside, right?
Hmm.
And then I'd open the doors up and you'd hear this budum, 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 and he
Oh,
thrived.
funny.
Everything else irritated his central nervous system.
Yeah.
Everybody is different, depending on, you can have this. I have 2 kids that are, biologically the same, right?
Right.
Same way, but very, very,
Very
very different.
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
used to, I was 19 when I had my son. And, my husband at the time was in the military. He was in the Navy, so he'd be out to sea. So, I'd go visit my friends and we'd be cruising Maine still with Brady in his car seat. And uh, we rocked out to some Boys to Men, and it was high volume. And it's funny. This is not me saying, hey, take your kids out and crank up the stereo, but it is what I did at the time. But he still listens to Boys to Men. He sings it when we do karaoke. And like we tease him, we call him radar because his hearing is amazing.
Wow.
He hears everything. You hear us whispering downstairs. He's like, I can hear you. Okay, radar. But
That's funny. Well,
yeah,
my son, he's 15 now, and it's crazy because he's a hockey player. So this kid will sit there and take his hockey ball and hit it against the wall. And what does it sound like? A heartbeat. Ba-doom, ba-doom,
oh
ba-doom.
wow,
Yeah.
that's
So it's
very
that
cool.
stimulation, and it calms him down. You'll see him be anxious, and he'll go
Yeah,
down there and spend a half an hour hitting that ball. And then he's done. He's calm. He's back to normal. We'll go do his
yeah,
homework. But I
yeah.
feel a lot of the things that he does mimic that heartbeat. Yeah.
Yes. Well, a lot of times parents think, I'm giving birth to a human being that I need to guide through life and influence through life. You actually gave birth to a human being who develops their own preferences for
Yeah.
things as soon as they're born. And yes, we do have to create an environment where they do have to have tolerances for things. They have to have expectations. But we also need to learn from our kids. What do they like? Who are they? Why do they need this? And let
Yes.
go of our own discomfort with, yeah, sometimes your kid wants to be a metalhead and it doesn't mean something bad
Well,
about
the
them.
emotional intelligence of knowing, reading your
Yes.
child, listening to your child, and being
Yeah.
able to say, whoever you are, whoever you turn out to be, is going to be okay with me.
Yeah. Accepting influence from them.
Yeah.
If
I
they
mean, I
like
took the
playing video
long way.
games.
Yeah, I took the long way to get where I am. I mean, I had such a path of, I quit college numerous times, took me 7 years to graduate, quit grad school, joined the Navy, ended up doing 2 years in the Navy, getting out, finishing that, and doing all these things. And everyone's like, when are you going to get your shit together? And I'm like, well, I got it together.
Mhm.
I had a great time along the way, but I
Yeah.
did it differently than I imagined my parents or anyone else around me wanted me to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's
Well,
like, at school, you're not going to go back. You're going to join the Navy. You'll never finish school. And all these messages that I received from everyone around me
oh
was based
yeah.
on their own bullshit.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it
Yep.
was well-intended advice, but yeah, throw that shit out. You got to be
Yep.
able to do things your own way and
Yes.
ignore that unhelpful advice that keeps you from um having the motivation to continue to drive yourself in the direction you want to drive.
Yes.
If you feel guilty because you're not listening to your parents, or you feel ashamed because you're not doing what somebody else determined is successful,
Exactly.
then you move more into fight, flight, freeze and away from thriving,
Yes.
and you don't find out those things that you want to explore. And trial and error, us both being ADHD, I struggled with that myself because my brain is like, I love everything. I could do this, I could do this, I could do this.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, trying to find something that I could tolerate long enough because I get bored so easily. It was, and that's why I love my job, because yes, it's the same thing a lot of times, but every person is different. So
Yes.
I don't get bored with it. I still thrive in that environment. And I've been doing it for 13 years. So, but I had to
ADHD,
find it.
because I try to do a million things at the same time, and it ends up with me usually falling down the stairs or doing something
Right.
stupid. My 15-year-old the other day is like, Mom, do you think it's time to go on ADHD
Yeah.
meds? Thinking yes.
Right.
I'm trying
Yeah.
to tell the
I,
world you can't do
yes.
that.
I almost dropped out of my doctorate program because I'm like, I cannot look at this paper one more second,
Yeah.
writing my dissertation. It was insane. And I did. I finally said, okay, I'm going to the doctor and I'm going to get medicine. And
Well,
it was life changing, my
life-changing,
ability
right?
to organize
Yes.
information. Yes.
It's
Oh,
funny. I was in regular when I was in my bachelor's undergraduate. I was always waiting to the last minute to cram everything in. I mean, crying in the shower at like midnight because I'm like, I've got a 17-page paper
yeah.
due tomorrow. And all my
Yep.
roommates were like, why did you wait till the last minute? I'm like, because I had 15 other credits. So when I got into grad school, what I did is I got the syllabus and I worked backwards because all the big stuff was due at the end of the semester. So I flipped it around and I started working on all the heavy, big stuff. And everyone's like, you're making us look bad. I'm like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to help manage my ADHD.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
learning my emotional intelligence for myself, knowing
Yep.
that if I waited to the last minute, I would fail. I would like not turn things in. I'd be a hot
Oh,
mess.
wow. Now,
Yeah.
see, I had to wait till the last minute because what I would find is if I started too soon, I would give up because I don't actually have to do it yet. So then
Oh,
when
that
I came
dopamine
back,
mining is great, isn't
oh
it?
yeah, yeah. So then when I'd come back, I might as well have started over the whole project. It didn't matter how far I got into it. The way an ADHD brain works is my brain, anyways, is you start the project and you finish it. Otherwise, it's going to look completely different the next time.
Yes.
You get that
Depending on your
creative.
mood.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. I'm like, okay, now I have to do it a different way because I took a break. And, in society, we perpetuate this idea that procrastination is always bad, but it absolutely isn't. I did better when I waited till the last minute and I knew I was forced to get something done by a certain time. And for some reason, because my brain picks up on patterns really easily, I was
Yes.
always able to predict how much time I needed. And I might have submitted it 1 minute before it was due, but I always felt like it was submitted and it was work that I was proud of and
Yeah.
my grades showed it.
Yep.
So I think that again is just learning to accept things about yourself outside of what society says you're supposed to be.
I remember all my colleagues and my classmates that were very neurotypical, like they hated being in groups with me because I would wait till the last minute. And that's when I got my best work done.
Yeah,
Being neurodivergent, that dopamine mining is truly a thing.
yeah,
We find that joy in it. We don't find anything with that last minute thing. All of a sudden we're
yeah,
like, gotta do it. And then we had this sense of pride. Look what
yeah,
I put together. It sounds amazing.
yep,
Everybody else took 7 weeks. I did it in 2 days.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
But all
And
my neurotypical friends never understood me. They're like, and they would ask me questions like, why'd you do it that way? I'm like, I don't know. Because I
yeah,
don't know. Like, my body just does things. And, when you're neurodivergent, there's no rhyme or reason sometimes. We just are in the
yeah,
mood, we have the motivation, and we're going to go for it.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do it when that shows up. But
Right.
mine never showed up early.
Right. Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I would like get everything done the first couple of weeks. So that way I would like throw it out there. I would like work and get all the big projects done. And I turn them in. Everyone's like, why are you making us look bad? I'm like, no, 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 no. It's not about you. You have to
Yeah,
understand. If
yeah,
I don't do this now, I'm going to
yeah,
be a freaking hot
yeah.
mess.
This is for
I
myself,
did
not
it for
against you.
myself. Yeah. And I would tell
Yeah,
my professors that I'm like, don't judge the rest of the class. This
yeah,
is just a thing. In order for
yeah,
me to be successful, this is what I need to do.
yeah. I
Yeah.
dropped out of high school in 10th grade because I absolutely hated, and this is why I could never go into the military because I don't take orders well. It just, if
Right.
I don't understand a situation, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to
Right.
be effective in
If
that
it doesn't make
environment.
sense, right? If they don't do it that
Yes.
makes sense, if they do it out of tradition or the way we always did it, I'm like,
Yeah.
makes no sense to me. I can't
Yeah.
wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll sit
So
there and
that's
be like, this
why,
is stupid.
yeah, after I had my son and my daughter, that's when I went back to school and finished high school. And I aced everything then because I was doing it under my own control, my own
It's
drive,
something you
my
had
own
passion
way.
with.
Yes, I
Yes.
still love it. I still love learning. But when I
Yeah.
was a kid and everyone's, pointing fingers at me, this is what you need to do. This is how it needs to be done. This is when it needs to be done. I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
no,
I
I'm
almost
out."
did not graduate high school because I missed too many days. And I was gifted and they wanted to put me in the gifted classes. And I'm like, why would I want to do extra work? Why do
Yeah.
I want to write more papers? So I wouldn't do it. And I would able to like miss school and go in and take the test and ace it. And a
Mhm.
lot of people hated me around me because they were struggling and I'd miss class and come back in. And I'm like, I really wish that the hybrid school or the online school was available back when I was in high school because I hated going every day. To me, it was pointless.
Yeah.
And when I
Oh, I
got
totally
in,
agree. I
yeah,
hated
and
it.
even in college, when I had to take the bullshit, general ed classes, I was like, what's the point of taking this? Why am I
Yeah.
memorizing things that happened in 1700? If anybody wants to ask me, I'll go look it up. But
Right.
memorization, why do I need that?
And that was encyclopedias back then
Right,
too. Like I
exactly.
even know how
You
to use
called
an
Ready Reference at the library, and she'd put you on hold and be like, I'll be back in 5 minutes with your answer.
right. Before Google. That's
Right.
hilarious. Yeah, even then you could do it that way. Yeah, I'll look it up.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if
But
I
it was when I
really need
finally
this.
got into grad school where everything is what I had passion about, is where I
Mhm.
like totally was like, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. And even though I have to write these papers and do these things, I'm so passionate about it that I can't
Mhm.
wait to do it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
if I can't apply something, I can't use it. It
Right.
just is useless information just flopping around in
Yes.
my brain
So when
uselessly.
I joined the Navy, I was 2 years into my PhD program when I quit, and I joined the Navy and I went in as like an E3, and I made E4 by the time I got out of boot camp. But I was in IT, and they're telling me things like connect this to that, and then go set the azimuth and elevation for the satellites. And I'm like, and then what? And then what do I do? Why am I doing this? And nobody can
Oh
explain why.
yeah.
And for me,
Yes.
I need to put all the pieces together for things to
Yes.
make sense. So I
Yeah.
hated my job. It made no sense to me. I had no passion to go and like read about shit because all the shit I was reading
Yeah.
about so boring.
And that's a lot of how I learn is I have to understand the process, and then really from the back end, the finished product, I kind of work my way back to where I'm at now.
Yeah.
And that's why I love applied neuroscience is it takes what I know about people in terms of psychology and
Yeah.
relationships, and then you take the neuroscience, which is established at the other end of all of this, how we exist as humans, and you start to take that and you see, okay, this is why this body does this or this brain does this.
It just makes sense intuitively, right? You can
Yeah,
look, for me, I can picture the brain, I can picture the nerves and all the things running through our body, and I can be like, oh, that's all connected.
yeah, yeah. I
I
love.
couldn't do that with like doing the IT things. It
Oh
was,
yeah.
yeah.
No, I have to understand it, or otherwise, I had to take my math classes online because I had to be able to understand it at my own pace. Sitting in a class when, like, even my husband, if Lonnie gives me two addresses, my brain just glazes over. I'm like, that's numbers. I have to see them on paper.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm like, don't even give me addresses. I can't do it.
Frank, text that to me.
Yep, I'll look at it.
Well, I think
Yeah,
next we should continue going over these pop psychology terms and like keep discussing them because I think it's
yeah,
really important for everybody out there to know
yeah.
a lot of the things that we read aren't true and there's no scientific evidence behind
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Let's do that. We'll pick
Yeah.
up where we left off.
Awesome. Everybody, you guys have a great week. Do things in moderation. Be curious, take some risks, be vulnerable
Yeah,
within
absolutely.
reason.
Absolutely. And like and subscribe. We're on all the major podcast platforms. Like and subscribe, share our podcast. And if you're interested, post some questions. We're happy to answer questions, and we're going to move towards interviewing people. If if people demonstrate that interest, we're really expanding. So like and subscribe and
Yes,
listen and
please.
share.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Have a great week. Go be
Thanks
great.
everybody.